Hi everybody and welcome to Liddy with Lydia, which is the series that I have recently begun where I reflect on books that I have read. Recently I read Coercive Control and I've taken some notes and I'm ready to reflect on what I learned reading Coercive Control. To begin, Coercive Control is about the ways in which society and men entrap women in relationships with unfair power dynamics without using direct force. Domestic violence is illegal, but coercive control is not unless you live in California in the United States. Were coercive control to happen to men, it would be immediately seen for what it is, but because of the specific sorts of oppression and domestic roles that are given and assumed to be given to women, it's not immediately spotted because of the context that we're living in 2024. I just have been thinking about this for such a long time because my life has clearly been deeply impacted by being a woman and by witnessing women in my life, young and old, be entrapped in relationships and in roles that they don't desire and that aren't right for them and aren't natural for them, but having it go way under discussed and way underlooked at because of the fact that they are women. And specifically when I moved to Texas, it's definitely alive and well in all the places I've lived, but maybe because I was old enough when I moved to Texas to begin to understand the nuance of womanhood, and also maybe because it was when I really started to become a woman. That was when I started to notice how dominant the oppression of women is in the society and how much it impacts my life in a way that I hate and genuinely resent so badly. And that kind of explains why I haven't looked into this topic as much as I wish that I had before. This topic is supremely triggering for me because it's like the toxins in the water that I've been exposed to my entire life. This is such a deeply personal and deeply traumatic topic for me that I think I've avoided it because I found it so triggering, and it's best to learn about things at the pace that will not dysregulate you. I learned about narcissism when I learned about narcissism. I learned about domestic violence when I learned about domestic violence. I learned about abusive relationships when I learned about them, because it wasn't safe for my nervous system to know what I already knew before I could know it without it dysregulating me and disrupting my growth. I almost feel like I had to shelter myself from direct knowledge of this because the indirect knowledge that I already had of it was so deeply enticing. Okay? Oliver, come here. I just have a whole bunch of, so that was my introduction. I have a whole bunch of notes on this and I just kind of want to go through them. And remember, this is a reflection, not a review and not a summary. So these are the things that really caught my eye. This is me interweaving my life, my perspective with what I've learned in this book and what I already knew from this book that resonated because I already know it. Yeah. First note that I have is, in quotations, "Women will follow your lead if you lead well." And I saw this recently on Instagram at, what's that called? Threads? And it was someone said that and I was what? What in the mind numbing bullshit? What in the mind numbing bullshit? Maybe that's just because women make smart decisions and if you lead well, we're likely to continue in the same direction you're going because you're leading well. That's like saying, like, men will follow your lead if you lead well. Do you see how it just doesn't, like, the context around that is just not the same? To the point that people would be like, oh no, men do what they want, men are independent, men blah blah blah. I mean, if I decide to eat when I'm hungry, men are probably gonna follow my lead, because they're probably gonna be hungry at some point as well. Like, we make the decisions that we make not because we're following other people, but because, and sometimes people do set good examples, but everybody follows, not just women, men too. So I just thought that was like some bullshit, and it was something that I thought of while I was beginning to read this book. It mentions in this book that there is a double standard against, like, the way that defense attorneys advocate on behalf of women versus men. And there's, like, oftentimes a narrative that's attached to defenses of women who ultimately harmed or murdered abusers who used coercive control and domestic violence against them to control their choices in life. Like, there's often, like, a narrative that they went crazy. Basically, if a woman goes to court and has murdered someone who has taken their rights away, an effective plea is she went crazy, she didn't know what she was doing, and, like, she was driven into insanity, and that is seen as, like, a feasible argument. But if you were to take a man into court and he murdered someone who had taken away his liberties in the same way that she had had her liberties taken away, because men are expected to be more independent and autonomous in the world already, because there's, like, the societal context of the fact that they enjoy those liberties more frequently, they wouldn't say, oh, he's crazy that he's crazy that he did that. They would say he was protecting his human rights. And then this leads us to the next point, which is degradative, I don't even know if that's a word, degrading roles are often assumed for women. I was thinking about, like, porn, and it was mentioned that porn is an objectifying force, and I've always been like, yes, I know that for a fact, but I don't really understand why. And it just kind of occurred to me while he was talking that, like, it's because you're making a human into an object that you can hold in your hand, that you can take with you anywhere. You have so much access to women just by having your phone. And you have so much access to women being degraded just by having your phone. But I'd never thought about it like it's because it's on your phone, which is an object, that it's objectifying. Because it's completely severing the human from their life. It's like you're seeing, like, basically like a floating body in the middle of no context. And that's what's so objectifying about porn, is it's like you don't know the story, you don't have the context for things to make sense. Like, that's why I kind of think that OnlyFans is actually better, because there is context. But we see how people are treated when they do OnlyFans online. Women are treated so terribly when they do OnlyFans online. Like, it's literally like a beheading. Like, it's horrible backlash. It's so abusive the way that they're treated. Something that he kept talking about was that there are different ways that within the confines of coercively controlled relationships, there are different ways for women to assert their independence that aren't, like, overtly apparent. For example, like, if a man says you must vacuum this many times a day, otherwise you'll receive a beating, she might evade that rule by pretending that she vacuumed when she didn't. Even if she knows that she's gonna get beat if she gets caught, she would prefer to get beat rather than lose her sense of self. Because succumbing to, like, someone else's decision for what your life should be, it's like losing yourself in what they want. It's becoming like completely dominated by them. So like to assert your independence, even if it leads to more harm coming to you, is sometimes worth it, because like survival is not just about your body surviving and your body being well, it's also about your spirit surviving and your spirit being well and your like capacity to make choices. Like people were found to be less traumatized in situations where they could make choices that showed themselves that they had independence. If you can make independent decisions, then you're less likely to be traumatized because you have reassured yourself that you still exist as a human being. And like a lot of trauma comes from like feeling like you no longer exist. To maintain identity, people will sometimes disobey and get more physically hurt just so that they can maintain their sense of identity. So coercive control is also a response though to a man feeling as if he has lost his identity as a man. So much of what it means to be a man in society is like equated to being violent. And so if a man like really feels like he's not manly, then it's part of like him asserting his identity as an authority figure, which makes him quote unquote more of a man, to take someone else's liberties away. In a society where abuse is equated with dominance, is equated with masculinity, if somebody feels emasculinated or is losing in some way, then they're likely to like assert themselves as a man, quote unquote, in the way that they believe that men are. And oftentimes they've learned it from their fathers, just by watching their fathers be abusive and like being like, that's the example of a man that I have, so if I'm feeling like I'm like not a man or I'm feeling embarrassed, then like that is how I can regain my identity as a man. So it's interesting because there's like a loss of identity in the woman where there's a gain in identity in the man, and it's literally like energy vampirism. It's literally like life sucking. It's like soul sucking. This reminds me though, like in my life, of like how men don't like to an excessive degree when I'm like expressing my own sexuality freely in a way that benefits me. It's crazy. And I also never let someone call me and this is no shame if you do, and if you do enjoy this thing, but like I don't let people in the bed call me a S or a W or a B, because it's just not accurate, and I hate it when people are saying things that are inaccurate. Yeah, it just rubs me the wrong way. And I don't want to be rubbed the wrong way. I want to be rubbed the right way. You know what I'm saying? There's such like anger about me expressing my sexuality in a way that benefits me or in a way that is free, both from men and from women. And it just like makes me realize like people who are in oppressed roles and abide by the laws that they think that society is saying about men and women, they resent you because you're gaining the benefit of not experiencing that oppression and of like being brave, and they can resent you if they're not brave enough or they're not able to express their like best human qualities fully. And so like they'll shame you for expressing your wants and desires, and they'll try to convince you to not, and then the people who are also doing the oppressing, obviously, who desire to express their quote-unquote manlyhood in this one specific way of like oppressing other people or like having a domestic housewife, which again, nothing wrong with domestic housewives who are making the choice, because that's your autonomy, that's you expressing your chosen identity, you know? So nothing wrong with that, but like men who express themselves in that way or desire to express themselves in that way, they feel resentment when you are going against that, because they see it as like you are the blockage, like people like you are the blockage to people like them expressing themselves. And it's like, I promise you can find someone who would willingly do what you are trying to control people into. But as like we become becoming more of a niche place for women to want to be degraded and domesticated by men because they're experiencing more of the benefits of not being degraded or domesticated by men. Especially financially and creatively and even legally. Shelters and women's shelters are so important because they establish individual identities by giving function back to individuals. Choice is the equivalent of freedom. Basically, shelters, women's shelters, are so important because it's within that safe space that they can rediscover who they are and re-strengthen the muscles that help them to act autonomously. When you're in like basically like an imprisonment setting for so long where most of the choices that you're making are for someone else and on someone else's behalf, you kind of like lose the capacity to understand who you are and what choices you would make were you to have a safe space where you could exercise those freedoms. So women's shelters are like a transition period between like imprisonment and like freedom. A place for you to practice being free and like to actually truly be free, but to do it in like shelter, you know? Fundamentalism, this is something that we were talking about earlier. Fundamentalism can be a choice that people make, and like to be a part of a fundamentalist group can be a choice that you make, and it can still be part of like you exercising your autonomy and freedom. You can make the choice to be subservient to a person. You can make the choice to agree to give your will away to another person for like a period of time. And that is still you being an autonomous creature, and therefore it is less traumatizing for you as an individual than if your freedoms were being taken away by force. So they'll say like, if this person comes from a fundamentalist like a Mormon background, and in their family it's okay for women to play a subservient role, then that person may grow up and make the choice because of their background to like live a fundamentalist lifestyle where they are subservient to a man. But the fact that they have a choice to walk away, that means that they're exercising their autonomy, and therefore they're less traumatized than someone who was raised in like a completely non-fundamentalist household and does not make the choice to, but gets roped into a coercively controlled relationship or a domestically violent relationship, and then is basically like experiencing the contrast of, dang, like I could be free but I'm being forced to not be free, versus like that person like chose to be subservient and is actually enforcing their will. And on that note, like it can really trigger men when people who are fundamentalist in nature, not in nature, but are choosing a fundamentalist lifestyle, like women, when they ask for help, it can be like super offensive to the men, because the men like to believe that the reason that the woman is subservient to him is because he's so manly. But it's not that. It is not that at all. It is that she's choosing to be subservient because it's a belief system that she holds and is upholding when she is subservient, which is so freaking interesting. Like when she'll be like, hey, can you help me with the dishes? He gets angry at that because it's her expressing the fact that she doesn't have to be with him. She's choosing to be with him because she believes in a lifestyle that he is enforcing. And sometimes I'll be like texting in a very kinky way with a rando, and a rando man, who has like beliefs that are fucked up, and it's because I'm into that in a sexual way, not like a lifestyle way. That's why I'm not with one of these people, because I'm into that I'm texting with him, and like I'll randomly make the choice to either like exit the situation completely, and they're just like astounded and offended, and it's like they don't know that I'm not tricked by what they're saying and doing and these things that they believe. They don't know because they believe it's like their capacity to manipulate me into being there that is keeping me there, but it's actually just my desire for like talk like that they do so well because that's who they are. That's who they have learned to be, and that is who they believe they should be. And it's like their belief system goes well with my interest. And that's why I text them. But I never create ties with these people that are like meaningful. The reason for that is because it's not in my belief system to commit to somebody who is that fucked up and like is committing themselves to a belief system that is so problematic. But I just do find it interesting to play into. But that's me exercising my autonomy, that's me exercising my choice, that's me being a free human. I interact with the understanding that there are laws to protect me if this person ever did come after me. And I interact with the understanding that there are benefits for me interacting, and there's a choice that I have to interact and that I'm choosing it, and that's why it's not traumatizing. It's safe and it's interesting, and it's me exploring the world, and it's me exploring myself and my own personal sexual interests as well. But there's a reason it doesn't cross over into like who lives with me, and there's a reason it doesn't cross over into who I talk to on a day-to-day basis. I have like a baseline stability about my life, and it's like nice to be able to return to it after like a fun day's work, a long day's work. In this book he talks about like how this is like more on that same subject. Pretending that you have a lack of choice is an expression of your choice. Like, to perform helplessness and like to see that as a form of femininity, that is like an expression of your gender, and it's also like an expression of your creativity. To appease men in your life and to like derive enjoyment from that is like an expression of like divinity. Like, to be honest, it's like an expression of like curiosity and of performance. It's a way that you're performing. It's like performance art. I think that's incredibly interesting. I was thinking about like microcontrols and like how like people in this day and age, men in this day and age, and even women in this day and age, will like control women's appearances and like insult their appearances if not like performed to the level of perfection or like femininity that this person believes is due. One of these is like telling women to smile more. It's like a form of micromanaging someone's body, or like telling them to take off their glasses. You'd look better without your glasses. Like, these are things we usually don't ever say to men. Like, I'm trying to think of one movie scene where a woman told a man how to look, and I can't. How many ones can I think of with women? So many. And if it does happen to men, it usually is like in a positive way over a negative way, and it's just like not the case with women. Like, it's pretty much equally positive and negative. And there's also like this like underlying sense of like overconsumption of someone's time that is like assumed. Like, I feel like, and this is not always true, but I feel like there's like a divide about how much time men have assumed in my life that they're entitled to. And there's like an assumption that I'll be open to seeing them and hanging out with them and like doing things for them more than with women. And that's like what makes women so enjoyable to hang out with, is that there's like a gratitude if you do spend time with them. And on the flip side, there's like a lack of gratitude if you do spend money on them. And I do think that that's very interesting. The flip side. Something he says in this book is that laws rely on compliance of ruled individuals, and for that reason we can expect to see progress being made. And because 50% of the constituents of America are women, and so like if we don't like a law, we won't comply, and for that reason it's in the lawmakers' best interest, if they want to get voted for or stay in office, to make laws that benefit their constituents. So it's for that reason he says that slow progress is going to happen on this front, and I would agree, and I think that that's interesting. Even if these lawmakers don't like firmly believe in their core that these types of progressions should be made and these types of protections should be made or cared about, like because the nature of lawmakers is to care so much about what other people think, they will be thinking about these issues. Progress will come from the public pressure that lawmakers are experiencing and the fact that they care so much about people's votes, because it is literally their livelihood and their job to care about people's votes and to care about public opinion. Okay, so this is something really interesting I was thinking about. It's like there are these things called safety zones that he mentions, and it's like places where you can be and you can express your autonomy as a woman who is in a coercively controlled relationship, where they have no reach, where they have no reach where they can control you from. If they have reached into a zone, it is no longer a safety zone. So like people who have like phone lines at work and like are being monitored or FaceTiming in their bedroom, even if they're in a long distance relationship, these are like reach. This is where they can be controlled. And safety zones are areas where you cannot be controlled, not even in the way that you express yourself, not even in what you say. And the role of domestic abusers and of coercively controlling abusers is to reduce the number of safety zones, because that limits their capacity to exercise their autonomy, which weakens them as a human being, because when you're not making autonomous decisions, you become weak in that capacity, which makes them have to exert less force to control you, which is good for them because that's their aim, is to be able to not even lift a finger and have you do what they say, because that's what they think is masculinity, is being obeyed because you're so feared. Something I think that is interesting is that safety zones are, if they're protected, then you're stronger. And one of the main safety zones that people have is like their private thought and journals. Journals are a safety zone if they're private. And if you're not allowed to journal, then you're not allowed to exert your free will. If you feel like someone's reading your journals, and this goes for like all genders, to all genders, there's a removal of safety zones in abusive situations when your journals are being read. It's like, I prevent you from existing outside of me. Like, how dare you extend your existence onto pages? How dare you sometimes say nasty things about me? How dare you express your discontent? How dare you exist, basically. And so I was just thinking about, like, I've journaled so much in my life. I've had people reach into my journals and attempt to control my thoughts by limiting my access to journals and privacy. And I just think it's so interesting. Like, I've continued to journal in my life, but there were times when I stopped, and I do think that that's associated with, like, me having been in dangerous situations where I didn't even have private thoughts because I was telling them everything that I thought because they were asking everything that I thought. And, like, they were so controlling of who I was as a human being and what I thought as a person. Like, they wanted me to be under them, and it was, like, so aggressive and so unenjoyable. that I actually lost so much of my, like, life force. I felt so oppressed. And, like, I didn't even have the desire to journal anymore because there were no independent thoughts that was out of their reach. And that's, like, also a problem with, like, being in school so much, is that, like, that is, like, controlling so much of your time and so much of your thought. It is brainwashing. It is. And it is dangerous that there are curriculums that are teaching things that are not true, and that instead of teaching how to think, they teach what to think and what to believe. That's just dangerous about our education system. And I think that, like, that goes beyond gender. That's like everybody's minds of being treated like that. There are a lot of things that do go beyond gender, but coercive control is only possible within, like, when you're speaking about gender roles, because coercive control is the specific phenomena that is women being neglected due to their assumed subservience. Okay, so I was thinking about, like, how this relates to my own life, and, like, how I mean, I'm grappling with the relationship between my parents, and I don't want to say too much because I do want to respect people's privacy, but at the same time, there are, like, ways that I saw my mother express her autonomy that were not healthy for the children to witness or experience. And it's, like, complicated because on one hand I am angry because how could you expose your children who you chose to have to, like, such dangerous things? How could you do that? And then also it's like, I see it from, like, a standpoint also where it's like, she grew up believing that this was the right thing to do to stay in a relationship, and as a woman especially, it would be frowned upon for her to end this relationship. And then if she is going to stay in this relationship, which is what she believed was the right thing to do, then there needed to be ways that she exercised her autonomy to remain human. And some of these were, like, developing, like, OCD and, like, compulsions that soothed her anxiety, like preventing him from getting rid of things ever, or, like, partaking in domestic duties because she felt like she had been regulated to domestic duties, and also because she felt shame about being a woman who could not, because of her mental health, perform duties, quote-unquote duties, like she should. I experienced, like, a lot of secrecy. Like, we weren't allowed to talk about the state of the household. We weren't allowed to talk about the state of their relationship, both of which were really spooky. And it's like, they took away my human rights because they took away their own. They took away each other's rights because they were taking away their own. Like, the right to leave a relationship when it feels wrong, she didn't believe in that. And therefore, like, it negatively impacted her children. And in some ways I can be like, and never speak about the reasons why in a way that makes sense to these children, then I don't believe that that's okay anymore. And I do, like, on a very personal note, feel like I would not have done that, even given the circumstances. And I think that that has more to do with personality combining with gendered expectations. It has to do with both. It has to do with both, and I also don't think it's the responsibility of children to be blind to those things, to not talk about things, and I don't believe it's the responsibility of women to be blind to those things and not talk about those things. And I think that if someone is choosing to believe that you should stay silent about such things, then they're choosing to be a worse person. And that's a choice that they're making. That's their autonomy that they're using to make a decision that is worse for other people and deprives other people of rights. And sometimes I do think about if in my family there had been men who she was meant to protect from the larger, older man in the family, then maybe she would have, like, felt the need to protect more. Because women are not protected in society. She looked down, she said, these are little women. These are little women. It's not my responsibility to protect little women because society does not tell me that there's an expectation upon me to protect little women. And maybe if she had had a man as a child, a little man, then there would have been more protections that she chose to enact and enforce, and she would have been seen as more responsible to her children, and therefore would have made decisions that reflected better on her. You know what I'm saying? It's more accepted in society for men and women not to speak up, and actually it's kind of shame for them to speak up on behalf of women who are being abused by anyone. And it's also not really talked about how that impacts, like, the mental health of women, and how, like, maybe women are not more crazy or anxious. Perhaps they're more traumatized because of the general agreement that they should get away with less and do more. And fall more into line, and be more compliant. To be forced to abandon who you are and your autonomy and your capacity to make decisions is traumatic. Therefore, I see lots of reasons why women would be more traumatized. Something that I was thinking about as I was reading this book was, like, how men are expected to give into society, women are expected to give into men, and children are left defenseless. And the old are generally disregarded. And I was thinking about how, like, there is, like, an abusive workforce and capitalistic entity at play that has historically impacted men more. No, not more, but has impacted men in a more direct and forceful way, and women in a more indirect and equally as forceful way, and equally as harmful way. But, like, the workforce, because more men used to work and used to have the right to work and make money, like, it used to be a system of oppression that applied mostly to men, and now it's becoming more applied to women, because women are working more and have the right to have money more. And so I just think that it's interesting, like, men would come home frustrated from being abused at work and overworked, and that is applying less and less, but it is still, like, historically speaking, women experience less workplace abuse because they experience less workplace. And I do think it's interesting that now in the workplace there's becoming a higher demand for, like, fair and equitable treatment of workers, at least in America. And it's as women are entering the workforce, and it's like as women are entering HR, as women are gaining autonomy, the rules and regulations are changing as well. And I think that that's an interesting association that is taking place. And I also think that we do pretty rarely think about, like, how women are now being exposed to the same abuses that men were in the workplace. Specifically, I think about being overworked Like, I'm seeing the same type of frustration happen in my female friends who work like a typical 9 to 5 as I saw in my parents, and as I see in, well, in my parent, in my father, and as I see in other men who are overworked and men who were overworked in my childhood. It's an always like on edge irritability, crankiness, and like an overcompensation for their feelings of like being overworked. Like, sometimes people will make work the center of their lives, and so important because they really don't have much of an external life. But I've also found that I believe generally women do have more of like a work-life balance that is healthy, and that I think is contributing to like people pushing on having more workplace rights, because more women are in the workplace to push for there to be a healthier balance of work and life. Women value being social, and being social causes progress, and I think that is pretty cool. And it is something that men are benefiting from, and that just kind of goes to show, like, men benefit from the presence of women more than they know, more than they consciously are accustomed to accepting. And so do systems. Okay, so something that he says at the end of this book is coercive control will be made fully and adequately illegal when safe zones are recognized for what they are, which is a place where women can make choices from a place of authenticity, from a place of who they are, from a place of their beliefs. When safe zones are recognized and protected, there will be an adequate law that has been created to act against coercive control. But until coercive control is understood for what it is, which is the removal of someone's autonomy and capacity to make choices for themselves, until it's recognized as that, then the law is likely, and people who make the law are all unlikely to create laws that regulate safe spaces and relegate safe spaces and like enforce and protect safe spaces, because there won't be seen a necessity for safe spaces until they know what coercive control really is on a fundamental level, which is like the progressive removal of someone's free will and choices, and therefore humanity and right to exist. Does that make sense? I hope that does make sense. So basically, like, the fastest way to protect women legally from experiencing coercive control is to recognize that the nature of coercive control is not always violent and is frequently about controlling choices, and that safe spaces combat the destruction of a woman's capacity to make choices, and therefore safe spaces being protected is the best way to protect women from coercive control. And that will reduce crime rates, and it will reduce the loss of like so much life and potential. That these people have to offer. Something that could be said against the protection of safety zones is that like the overstepping into someone's personal life using the law is too much, and that the law should not extend to people's personal lives. People should be able to do what they want to do in their personal lives. That could be an argument. But if you're using that same logic, like, what you're saying is that you shouldn't be able to change what's going on inside of someone's personal life And when you compare this to like what has been done to end slavery, that logic just doesn't hold up, because slavery was a deeply personal and interpersonal system of oppression that was woven into culture and woven into people's belief systems. And so to be like, because this is their beliefs, because they're practicing their beliefs, women should not have protections in their personal lives, because in their personal lives they're just exercising their beliefs. But historically speaking, like, the end of slavery came about because we regulated people's personal lives in order to protect an oppressed population and an abused population and a systemically degraded population. So you have to use the same logic that we used to end slavery, to end domestic violence and coercive control against women and gender-based oppression. We just do. They are equally important. It is that important. A final thing that I want to say about this is like about my own personal experience and like the way that I experienced this book and thoughts that it prompted in me, is that in my own personal life, my female caretaker asserted her power against a male caretaker in my life by basically like waging war against him, but without consideration for the cost of civilian life. And like in this metaphor, the way that I think about it is like, these are two grown adults. They have a lot of power, they have a lot of influence on the way that their children's lives turn out and the environment in which their children are being raised and how traumatized their children are, how damaged they are. They have so much power over these things. And it's almost like, rather than look out for citizen well-being, sometimes two powers are more interested in waging war against one another in kind of like a battle of the egos and like a battle of culture. Like sometimes what they're fighting about is conceptual, it's concepts, and it's culture, it's cultural, it's what people believe is correct and believe is the correct way to live. And sometimes it's right to fight these battles, and sometimes it has like a horrible toll that it takes on civilians. And it's like, both things can be true, that there's a reason why someone fought the war, and also that the impacts of them having fought the war wiped out entire civilian populations, and each of those civilians was an individual life and has individual potential, and it is a crime against that individual. And at the same time, like, the war was fought, and it was fought for certain reasons, and you can conceptually agree with the reasons why it was fought, while also believing that maybe the best way to protect future generations is to nurture future generations, and that it might have actually been more beneficial to protect the civilians than to wage an independent war based in concepts that has like not just conceptual impacts on real human beings, but like actual lived impacts on human beings. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I'm saying? That is literally all the notes that I have. That is all that I have to say about the topic. That's more than what I thought I had to say on the topic. Because this topic is like I said, it's really personal. It's really deeply intertwined with the fabric of who I am and what made me, and it's also very important that I speak up about this type of thing because I'm not the only one who's impacted. As a matter of fact, there's not a single person who exists on this planet who isn't impacted by these things in a negative way. And that is why it is so important to me. And I have so much love for you. Thank you so much for watching. And, yeah. Thanks for watching.